All right, getting started here. Okay, great. I can see people starting to log in, so we'll get going. Hey everyone, this is Achyuta Bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to preview Jupiter's entrance into Pisces, which is happening in December. And this past week, what I've been doing is dedicating a number of live casts and videos to looking at all of the major events of December, but giving us sort of a preview. We're going to be looking at these closer to the time of each transit's perfection. But I think it's good to get out in front of these because they are all process oriented. They all have history behind them. And it's good to treat them like dynamic processes rather than just one-off events. So today we're going to take a look at Jupiter into Pisces, go through the history of it, go back 12 years when Jupiter was last in the sign of Pisces, and try to get everyone prepared. I'll take Jupiter through the houses briefly, and then I will take some live readings. So if people want to share their birth charts later on today as I'm going. I'm going to take a look at probably 3 or 4 birth charts and give you guys a feel for how you might interpret Jupiter in your birth chart right now entering Pisces based on other configurations, in addition to, say, the house placement. So at any rate, thank you all for being here. Where are you guys coming from? I'd love to do some roll call here at the beginning. I'm seeing, let's see. I don't know how, John, you always manage to be like the very first person in here saying hello from Colorado, but you are like, you should get like, you know, the attendance awards in like middle school, you should get like perfect attendance award. Thank you for being here, John. Hello from Florida. Emma's coming in from Lacey, Washington. Pensacola for Sarah. Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, Belfast, Texas, Tampa, Amsterdam, another Washington, Gettysburg, Australia. I'm not going to try and say it anymore. Edinburgh. I know I said it wrong last time and everyone tried to tell me how to say it. I got people like sending me long emails about how to pronounce it. And I was like, come on, just give me a little, all I need is a one word email, like hyphenating it in the with the right pronunciation. You don't need to write me a page. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys for teaching me on that one. Let's see, Detroit, Washington, Utah, Germany, Sweden, Sacramento, Mississippi, Illinois, the moon. Yes, someone's coming from the moon. I like it when people get really honest and creative. So New Hampshire. Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. Before I dive into talking about Jupiter into Pisces today, I want to give a little update on the Kickstarter. We have 35 days to go left in my annual fundraising drive, and we have 339 backers so far toward our goal of 1,367. So we're making good progress, but every day the goal is to just keep chipping away at our goal and try to gather more backers if you're able to. I'm going to put the link to donate into the chat box. When you donate and support this channel in 2022, you can pick up a lot of different rewards. There's the link in the chat box. You can pick up readings and you can pick up exclusive lectures that I give. You can also pick up 50% off to any of my classes. You can pick up any of my classes, and the cost when you're doing it through the Kickstarter is half off the normal tuition rate and even $400 cheaper than the normal early bird rate. So it is the best deal of the year for people who want to study with me in 2022 or beyond. When you pick up, when you donate and pick up one of the programs, by the way, you can use those anytime you want. So for example, you can also bundle them. If you scroll down, you'll notice that there's all sorts of different rewards. There's a year ahead horoscope reading. There's exclusive lectures on different topics. There's the Astrology of 2022 deep dive lecture that I'm not releasing anywhere else. And then there's some mini readings. There's 37 personalized mini readings left. So those are going pretty fast. Then with the courses, You could bundle them. You could take my year 1 and my year 2 certification courses. They're each 1 year long, but you don't have to start them both in 2022. You could start one in 2022 and the next one in 2023. You could bundle all 4 of my programs. I have 3 advanced programs in my first year course, so 4 total. And you could package all of them together. And the more that you package together, the more the price of each individual class is going down. So for people who really know that they want to go through all of my programs or even just my first and second year program, this is the best time to save. So if you're enrolled in one of my programs, be sure you take advantage of this if you know you're going to sign up for year 2 or whatever. I can't thank you guys enough for donating. Let's see if we can get to 400 backers over the weekend. I don't think that's an unrealistic goal. We're about 60 more backers to go before we hit 400. Anything and everything helps. If you can't support with a donation, your prayers, your likes, your subscription, click the notification bell, share the videos with other people, say a prayer for me, my family, that this channel would continue to be a place of good content and that I would continue to stay focused in the right spiritual way to make sure the content is good. So at any rate, that's that. And I really deeply appreciate it. Every day of my life, year round, you guys have heard me say this a lot, but I like everyone to know that this is my spiritual practice. I wake up every morning, I work out, I practice yoga, get in my 90 minutes of mantra meditation. I sit with sacred texts from all over the world. I read, I study, and then I prepare this talk, whatever it's going to be. The stories you hear, all the interesting series that you hear, those are all planned out. Those take all my research time. Half of my work day, every single day is spent doing this. And then I go and work with clients. And on the weekends, I teach classes. So the Kickstarter is a huge reason why I'm able to have life as an astrologer. This is a huge portion of how my business works, you could say, is to make sure that I have subscribers out there who like my work, who say, I really value this channel, so I'm donating and supporting it however you can. So thank you guys for letting me plug the Kickstarter. I really appreciate it. We're going to look now at Jupiter into Pisces, which I'm super stoked about because to me, it's been a long couple of years of let's be real, of dealing with Jupiter in Saturn ruled signs. And we need to move on. That's how I'm feeling today. I'm like, thank you, Saturn, for just being all Saturny for lots of time now, because we've had Saturn in Capricorn for several years, Saturn in Aquarius for a number of years. We had Jupiter in Capricorn in its fall for a year. Now Jupiter's in Aquarius, Saturn sign. And then we had the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Saturn sign. It's like, my God, with the Saturn. And has it ever, think about it. We're in this pandemic, everyone's cloistered and everything's polarized, very Saturnine. Saturn rules oppositions. Saturn is the Lord of opposition, and the opposition aspect is of the nature of Saturn. And so restriction, the feeling of polarization, isolation, confinement. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Because that's what I feel, and that's what I see when I look at the world these days. A lot of division, a lot of polarization. When Saturn was in Capricorn, politically, what was everyone talking about in the United States, at least? A wall or Brexit or whatever the case might be. You're talking about, you're not a part of my group, or you're in the in group and you're in the out group, or you're, there's just an emphasis on division. On, well, you're either for this or you're against this. I want this or I don't want that. Or there's restrictions, codes, masks, not masks, vaccines, mandates, arguments about vaccines and mandates, all of this stuff, wherever you may stand on it. I'm not taking a position here. I'm just here to tell you it's all Saturn. It's like the whole thing is just a nice Saturnine fiesta. So let me put in the outer planets here in the chart that we're looking at, and let's get to business, because it's, the exciting thing about having Jupiter moving into one of its home signs is that we are no longer going to have to deal with so much heavy Saturnine energy. You're going to start to see that lift. And to me, that is like the most welcome news ever. Not only that, but Jupiter is going to get into a conjunction with Pisces next spring, while Venus is also exalted in Pisces. That's going to be just a pretty amazing transit. One of the most subjectively positive transits that I remember looking at, in the stars in recent memory for the past couple of years, at least. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. But let's just track out the entrance of Jupiter into Pisces first. So here you can see, here's Jupiter in Aquarius, right? And it's at about 24 degrees. And what you're going to see is next month, if we go forward just a little bit, you're going to go forward just a bit, and there it is. It's going to be, I'll give you the exact day here just to make sure I've got it. But yeah, let's get it down to the hour just to be extra precise. So it's about December 28th, 11:51 p.m. Eastern time in the United States that you're going to see Jupiter enter Pisces. Now, that entrance is complete because we had a little bit of an entrance of Jupiter into Pisces in 2021, then it retrograded back into Aquarius where it is now. Once it enters Pisces at the end of December next month, it's going to move through the whole sign of Pisces. So now we're getting like real, we got a little preview over the summer. Now we're getting a real immersion. We'll go back over that in a minute about the previous time period that we had in 2021. But so Jupiter into Pisces. Now let's just watch how this is going to unfold. We see that, let's watch this. So Jupiter in Pisces goes all the way through, and here's to me, this is like one of the most magical parts of the transit right about here. So you guys can see that here's Jupiter conjoining Neptune while Venus is also in Pisces. That's about April of like mid-April of 2022. And then we can see what happens. You get a Venus-Mars conjunction, Venus-Mars right here. And they are Venus-Mars co-present in the same sign in Pisces. And they're all moving together as Venus then comes through the conjunction with Neptune. So you got kind of a triple alignment of Jupiter, Venus, and Neptune all together in late April. That's fantastic. Like, honestly, and what I like about that one, I think is really interesting about it, is that if you go forward just a few days on April 30th, we've got a pretty exalted Jupiter Venus conjunction, because you've got an exalted Venus and a Jupiter in its own domicile. So it's like, just super, benefic looking conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. What's happening at the same time? A solar eclipse with the moon exalted in Taurus and loosely conjoined with Uranus. So there's just this huge like Pisces Taurus stellium that's happening right around the time of the eclipse on April 30th. So in particular, as Jupiter's moving through Pisces through the winter and spring of 2022, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I just love the way that it's looking, because you've got this huge benefic congregation of planets in Pisces, while there's also an exalted moon solar eclipse in Taurus with Uranus. To me, that's like one of the most hopeful looking transits that I feel like I've seen in a long time. So maybe I'm being optimistic. Maybe I'm feeling cooped up, and so I'm projecting something of that into the transits. I don't know. We'll find out. But I suspect that this is going to be a pretty darn uplifting moment of the year, and probably a brighter moment than, like I said, we've had in the past few years. So that's how I'm seeing this. I want to go back in time a little bit now. Well, actually, let me finish this up. So Jupiter then enters Aries. We're going to see Jupiter entering Aries essentially about the middle of May, but let's just say it's about May 10th into the 11th. May 10th into the 11th, Jupiter changes into Aries. Okay, so you've got about December 28th to about May 10th, 11th as a chunk of time where Jupiter moves all the way through Pisces. Then what's going to happen is Jupiter is going to take a retrograde eventually. It's going to dive into Aries for a while. And then it starts retrograding over the summer, and then it comes back into Pisces right about the beginning of late October, beginning of November, comes back into Pisces. And then it stations at late Pisces, like end of November, and then pops back out pretty quickly by December. So you just have a little bit of time where Jupiter has a reoccurrence in Pisces late in the year of 2022. The main the main chunk of time is between December 28th and about May 10th. So, and then, by then we'll be previewing Jupiter into Aries, which I also think is going to be a really good transit. Again, just getting Jupiter out of Saturn's sign while Saturn is so empowered, I think overall is a good thing. It just changes the mood. You know what I mean? So now let's go back in time. You can trace this transit backward. Every 12 years, Jupiter completes a cycle through the zodiac, which means that you can also go backward in time to find the last Jupiter return in any sign. And let's see, and it was, let's see here, I'm going back to, yep. So here is, you can see that it's right about, the beginning of January 2010 into, January, like late January 2010, very beginning of 2010, the Jupiter last entered Pisces. And then what we see, there it is, this is about 2000, beginning of the year 2010. And then it goes forward, and you're going to see Jupiter go all the way through Pisces, hits Uranus at the end of Pisces. I actually remember that very well based on what was happening in my life. But anyways, it hits Uranus at the early degree of Aries in June of 2010. But at any rate, so you have January to about June of 2010 as a comparable period. I would say that's the most important one to look at, though we did see Jupiter return into Pisces from September all the way. September of 2010 hits Uranus again by January 2011 till about January 2011. So it does have kind of it gets recalled into Pisces, and it gets recalled. Let's see, make sure I get that again. So just about the beginning of September, and it stays in Pisces in 2010 from September all the way till about January of 2011. Okay, so those are two comparable windows that should probably bring up similar themes within your birth chart between back then and now. So it's really important to do those comparisons, because that's how you get the most, that's really how you get the most information about a transit, is by comparing it to previous periods and getting a sense of what kinds of topics it activates in your chart by whole sign house and by aspect, like what's getting aspected in your birth chart. So at any rate, bookmark those periods, because what I want to do in a little while, once I'm done saying a few more things about Jupiter and Pisces, is I'd like to do a few sample readings. But in order to do a few sample readings, I ideally would like to call on people's charts who have some memory of what was happening in that 2010 into early 2011 period. Because if you can remember, that would add to the demos today. So I prefer people volunteering who could also maybe share something in the chat box along the lines of that 2010 Jupiter and Pisces era. So at any rate, we'll get back to that in a minute. So this is one of my favorite texts. This is called The Classical Seven Planets, Source Text and Meaning. It's by Charles Aubert. And I had him, he's here in Minneapolis, not far from me. And I had the nice occasion to go walking around the lake with him last year and talking astrology for a couple hours. It was really nice. And he wrote this book, which is kind of like an anthology of all of the classical authors and what they said about the planets. So I want to share this with you in terms of the Jupiter entrance, the Jupiter entry and what he wrote. So he says, this is from Valens in particular. From Vettius Valens, Jupiter indicates childbearing, engendering desire, love, political ties, acquaintances, friendships with great people, prosperity, salaries, great gifts, and abundance of crops, justice, offices, office holding, rank and authority, authority over temples, arbitrations, trusts, inheritance, brotherhood, fellowship, beneficence, secure possession of goods, relief from troubles, release from bondage, freedom, deposits and trust money and stewardships, etc. And he just kind of summarizes. He said there are a couple of main themes here. Jupiter is giving life. Jupiter is abundance of all good things, growth, expansion, good times. We also see elevation, high rank, honor, and the power that goes with high office, along with good fortune. Jupiter relates to money and control over money. Money plus good fortune gives gifts, relieves from trouble. And Jupiter, he goes on to talk about Jupiter's association with religion. One of the ways you can understand Jupiter broadly is that Jupiter is interested in bringing that sense of coherent order to the cosmos. Zeus as the great cosmocrat, the orchestrator of the cosmic symphony. There's problems with Zeus, obviously. I actually talked a little bit about that in my lecture yesterday that I gave on Sagittarius, if you want to go back and listen to that. But Jupiter is related to the idea that there are shapes and orders in society that lend themselves to creating virtue, harmony, goodness, justice, and cohesion. So ideally a government, ideally a justice system, ideally a religion, or ideally an institute of learning, whatever it may be. Ideally, people who have authority are good and virtuous, so in an ideal world, Jupiter represents those offices that are supposed to grant cohesion, virtue, goodness, wholeness to our social experience and to the cosmos itself. So that's just a simple way of thinking about what Jupiter brings. Also, Jupiter, especially in Pisces, because it is a water sign, Jupiter tends to bring fertility. Fertility can be it's a broad concept in ancient astrology. Fertility, a water sign, all the water signs were considered fertile. The water signs can mean that money grows, friendships grow, babies grow. It can mean that sex desire grows. It can mean that promotions occur, but it tends to mean that things grow and develop. In fact, when I did an I Ching reading for Jupiter into Pisces this morning, and I said, well, what should we expect from Jupiter into Pisces? The hexagram that I received was, oh, great, I'm going to forget now, 46, upward mobility, I think is the right one. But it's a picture of something growing slowly and gradually upward with progress. And so the idea of growth, it was depicted in the hexagram that I grew. Things will grow, things will flourish, which is nice because when Jupiter, a planet naturally associated, for example, with sperm in ancient astrology, is in Saturn's signs. Saturn being a planet that's often associated with infertility or with things that don't grow, like as in winter and death and decay and limitation or restriction of life or the conditions that make plants die. Then things don't grow as well because Jupiter is limited by its host, Saturn, where it's been for the past 2 years. So the opportunity for things to grow again, for things to become very fertile and lush. Remember that Pisces is the double-bodied sign of the fish and the sign that creates the transition of the takeover of light. So Jupiter has also been on the dark half of the zodiac for about 6 years. And when it's in Pisces, in hitting into Aries in 2022, it's making the transition into light. So not only is it fertile, but it's moving into a phase where Jupiter is going to become a lot lighter, which is nice overall because it suggests that we may see, rather than the harder, restrictive, and life-killing conditions of Saturn, we may gradually start to see the other qualities coming through, the life-giving qualities of Jupiter. Remember that last December, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which means we're in a new era. Well, the new era toned by Saturn is going to start to change and morph, and you're going to see a lot lighter qualities starting to come in overall compared to the darker, heavier qualities that we've been dealing with really since Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto all got together in Capricorn in 2020. So we've just gradually been working toward this new era in the collective, but also personally. And then we can see that when Jupiter hits that double-bodied sign of the fish, it's about to head into the light half of the zodiac. Saturn's not far behind. In 2023, Saturn will move into the sign of the fish, and we'll see change for Saturn as well. Saturn will now be beholden to Jupiter rather than Saturn being in its own power. So these transitions are very slow coming. Saturn's long, slow transit of, with 4 to 5 years worth of going through these two signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. So you're kind of keeping all of that in perspective and just thinking about things that are preparing to grow, especially in April when Jupiter hits Neptune along with the exalted Venus, and then Venus and Jupiter can join right as there's a solar eclipse with an exalted moon in Taurus. Very fertile, a lot more feminine energy coming in, very fertile growth-oriented energy that comes through in the spring. I mean, it's kind of an explosion of much more fertile, optimistic energy, which feels nice because it feels like it does feel like there's more optimism in the air a little bit, at least for me, as I'm looking forward at the astrology of 2022, preparing my 2022 talk. I'm like, man, the astrology just looks a little bit better next year. Not that we're completely out of the woods with Saturn and Uranus, for example, that'll come back in the fall of 2022, but we're turning a corner with Jupiter picking up dignity. That's for sure. So here's a few other things. This is from Abu Mashar, medieval astrologer. He indicates the soul, Jupiter does, which nourishes life, animal bodies, children, the children of children, embryos, scholars, legal experts, making judgments between people, acting justly, understanding, sages, the interpretation of dreams, sincerity, truth, piety, modesty, reverence, unification, insight into religion, uprightness, virtue, someone who will be praised or have a good reputation. See, these are all Jupiter's qualities. And again, think of how big of a difference it makes if Jupiter is having Thanksgiving at Saturn's house for 2 years. You know what I mean? Versus Jupiter moving into its own sign, where what's going on in Pisces? Well, this is the feminine temple of Jupiter, and it's the exaltation of the goddess Venus. So this is not only a fertile sign, but it's a feminine sign. It's a sensitive sign. It's a dreamy, romantic sign. It's a very sensual place. And so there's a lot of, to me, this is a sign that the springtime energy that's going to come through, especially later on, is probably going to be really lush in terms of the imaginal world and the imaginal life of the soul. What are we dreaming of? What are we making that we felt cut? What have we felt cut off from? Where have we felt dry? Where has there been a sense of despair or drudgery? Where has the mundane captured us and imprisoned our imaginations? Where have we been cut off from nourishment spiritually or emotionally? And it's sort of like taking us all and setting us down in Bali for a little while or something. That's kind of the vision that comes to my mind. So I love this one. And I love the idea that also goodness can come back in some way. I feel like one of the ways of understanding Jupiter going through back-to-back Saturn-ruled signs is that there's a testing of our faith. There's potential erosion of our faith, or testing or erosion of different kinds of social or civic structures, testing of social structures, questions about justice, questions about legality and morality and religion. And, it has all this gravitas to it. It's heavy. I like to think of the idea of something more redeeming, uplifting, inspiring, emotionally stirring us back to life after a long winter karmically. So I'm a big fan of this shift for Jupiter, and I'm not worried about Jupiter going into Aries either. I like that spring sign of the Ram for Jupiter as well. I think that's going to be awesome. I think you're going to see people liking the Jupiter energies for the next couple of years a lot more than probably the Saturn ruled signs. Anyway, so not to completely dump on Saturn ruled signs. I think it's not about the Saturn ruled sign. It's about the length of time we've been dealing with it. We've been working through the heavy Saturn stuff. So, okay. At any rate, I wanted to read you guys a few passages. Maybe there's one more. Let me just check. Yeah. Yeah. So those are pretty good. There's a few others. William Lilly has one that's nice. When ill placed, this is important too. These are the downsides of Jupiter, wasteful, hypocritically religious, stiff in maintaining false tenets in religion, ignorant and careless, arrogant, schismatical, etc. So basically, you get like Zeus on a bad day, like arrogant, proud, boastful, things that are too big. Expansion isn't always a good thing, right? So, and also kind of the dogma potentially of Jupiter, or the like, I'm so proud, I'm so noble, I'm so puffed up, these kinds of qualities. And of course, the potential for authority to be used corruptly, though projecting an image of virtue. I think that hypocrisy is pretty common with ill-placed Jupiters, but this is not. This is a well-placed Jupiter. I think we're going to see mostly more of the positive significations that are kind of expressing themselves. Okay, so what I want to do next is I want to take Jupiter through the houses and just give you guys a sense of what to expect based on Jupiter through all 12 whole sign houses. And then we're going to do some sample readings today, which should be, I think that'll be fun. Okay, so I'm going to put Aries on the ascendant. And actually, I think I'm still back in 2011. So let me bring it back. And let me just put. All right, here we go. Getting it all lined up. All right, so we're going to take it through. I'm going to take it through the 12 signs now, and we're going to start with Aries on the ascendant, which means Jupiter's going into your 12th house. Now, normally 12th house transits for me, I'm always like, oof, they can be really hard. The 12th house transits can be challenging, but Jupiter in its own sign in the 12th house, I like to think of more as a period of psychological, spiritual, or intellectual self-reflection that can lead to growth, renewed faith, inspiration. I see Jupiter in the 12th and I think about charity work and helping people. I think about benevolent healing activities. I think about people taking time to go on a retreat or to spend more time in spiritual contemplative states. So for Aries risings, I like where you're heading this year in terms of a charitable, healing, spiritual energy. There's a little bit of a heaviness in the 12th house. So maybe some of the growth comes through the challenges of having to look at your blind spot. But overall, I really like this one for you guys. Let's go forward to Taurus. So if you got Taurus in the first house, if you're a Taurus rising, then Jupiter's coming into your 11th house. So what I like about Jupiter in the 11th house is that you're moving into a space where allies and groups of people are probably going to be a really strong and positive influence. This is a time, for example, when I'm a Taurus rising, right? So if I go back to 2009, 2010, that period in 2010 that I described, what was happening at that time for me was I was starting to get my foot into I had a book coming out, and I was starting to get my foot into the yoga world through managing a yoga studio, meeting my first astrology teacher, and taking my first formal classes. I've been studying on my own, but I was taking my first formal astrology classes and just meeting a ton of people in New York City that would end up becoming vital allies as I developed my astrology career later in 2010. So all of the allies in the astrology and yoga world started coming flooding into my life then as Jupiter, and moved into this fertile sign in my 11th house of friends. So you can usually see allies, benefactors, important groups of people, or social connections. Maybe they're religious or somehow share some kind of values or common goals or missions in common with you. But I like the idea of benefiting from powerful, positive, hopeful, exciting connections socially with Jupiter in that house. All right, let's go forward to Gemini rising. So if you're a Gemini rising, we're putting this Jupiter into your 10th house. Now, I have a friend who is a Gemini rising, and we were just recently talking about this. He got a new job that paid a lot more the last time Jupiter entered his 10th house. So sometimes, because the 10th house is related to career and your professional calling, let's say overall, you might see that there's a lot of growth in the next year, or even just between late December and like May 10th, you might see just a rapid flourishing of your career, things like growth or promotion, being granted higher authority, or getting in touch with or being seen or recognized by people who have more power or authority within your industry or workplace. Certainly this transit can be a little opportunistic, but otherwise I think mostly it's positive stuff rolling into the career house for you if you're a Gemini rising. See, such a positive transit. It's so nice. So nice to not be talking about, these crazy. I mean, I tried to go over Venus. Venus is retrograde with Pluto early in the week, so we can like end on a high note. But this is like a legitimately, to me, very exciting transit. Jupiter in Pisces going into the 9th house if you're a Cancer rising. So my wife's a Cancer rising, and this is really interesting because it was right around this time in my wife's life that she was meeting some really important people in her spiritual growth and development. And that's the nature of the 9th house. It could be spiritual growth, development, mentors, teachers, programs, learning, maybe some important travel that you're going to do. It was around this time. Actually, it was this time that I met my wife. When Jupiter was in Pisces was actually when I met my wife for the first time. And we ended up, I ended up teaching with her at a yoga retreat she was leading. I ended up teaching astrology for the weekend at the yoga retreat. And it was like a whole new community of spiritual people that ended up playing a huge role in my life. Well, for her at the same time, there was a lot of new spiritual insights and practices that were coming into her life. I always just think that's interesting to compare too. One thing that you can do is sit down if you're married or if you're dating someone or with your kids or whatever, and if they're a little bit older, if they've had at least one before, you can look back and go like, what was going on in your life? What was going on in mine? And sometimes it's fun to compare notes to see how Jupiter works in different ways at the same time in your life and other people's life that you're close with. So Jupiter in the 9th, though, overall, I think brings a lot of positivity around faith, religion, spirituality, higher learning, teachers, mentors, sages, and so forth. My wife is about to start doing a series on the goddess in Bhakti Yoga with a revered like a luminary in the Bhakti Yoga tradition named Rukmini Devi Dasi. And I'm going to be airing those interviews, copies of those interviews on my Bhakti Wednesday podcast here on my channel. And, that's happening. Those interviews with that teacher are happening right as Jupiter enters her 9th house in this feminine water sign. I just think that kind of stuff is so interesting. So watch for 9th house stuff if you're a Cancer rising. All right. Anyway, let's go forward to Leo rising. So if you're a Leo rising, we're taking this and we are putting Jupiter into the 8th house. Okay, hands down, best potential signification for Jupiter in the 8th house is being blessed by other people's resources. That's such a broad thing to say, but for example, and it is the house of death and inheritance. For example, when Jupiter was in my 8th house last, one of my astrology teachers at the time, I didn't know him very well personally, but he had a huge impact on me, and he lived not far from me, so I visited with him a few times and so forth. His name was Robert Schmidt, and he died, and I happened to be there. And then while he died, and then helped raise money for him, did a fundraiser, helped with a fundraiser to get it started to help with funeral expenses for his wife, and then was gifted all of his archives, like hundreds of hours worth of his lectures that I didn't yet have. And that all happened while Jupiter was in my 8th. So it was being about raising money from other people to help someone in their death. There was a huge inheritance of archived wisdom, like Jupiter in the 8th gave me this like archive of wisdom. And there was a death, but it was a death that came with this deep teaching about life. And for me, it was one of the most profound events in my life. And that was Jupiter in the 8th last time. Jupiter in the 8th can bring mundane things, though, like marrying somebody with wealth or getting together with a partner who has really incredible assets and resources that they've built in their life and that can join with yours and, create a better situation. And that's not, I'm not talking about gold digging or anything like that. Like, oh, go find someone who's got a bunch of money, but no, like someone who has genuinely impressive accomplishments or assets or resources spiritually, mentally, emotionally, financially. Sometimes those people enter your life when Jupiter's in the 8th house, and it benefits you. So I like the idea of beneficial people with beneficial resources coming into your life. Also, I have to say that benefits or blessings or silver linings that come through death or loss is a part of Jupiter's significations in the eighth as well. Okay, so that's if you're a Leo rising. Now, if you are a Virgo rising, you're going to have this transit in your seventh house. So, seventh house, obviously a place of love and relationships, but it was also the place of sexuality. Most people think about sexuality in modern astrology in the eighth house, which is unfortunately just not true in ancient astrology. The houses that spoke to sexuality were 7 and 5. But at any rate, most specifically, those two houses. Why the seventh house? Because when a planet sets in the seventh house, it dives under or into the horizon. So when you see the sun set and go down into the earth, that image was thought of as the image of sexual penetration, of the man entering the woman. And so that image of a planet going into the west had a sexual connotation. And so the seventh house is a place of the consummation of marriage, as in sex. But now, broadly speaking, over time, it gets associated with marriage, the sort of institution of marriage, intimate relationships, and in ancient astrology, sexuality, broadly speaking. So you can look at Jupiter in the seventh house and say that there are potentially beneficial people coming into your life, again, like relationships or partners or whatever. There also may be heightened or increased sexual desires, exploration of sexuality, more busy or active time sexually. It can be a fertile period. It can also lead to pregnancy, because Jupiter is a planet that tends to bring, it's one of the procreative planets. The moon can be that way too, but Jupiter in the seventh in a water sign, if you're Virgo rising, yeah, I mean, you could get pregnant with that transit. Marriage, but also, you have to watch for all the shadows of Jupiter in the seventh house. Sometimes things that are too big, blown out, so you want to be careful of, like, especially with Neptune there as well. The imaginative and romantic impulses may be a lot stronger for you in the year ahead. Just don't, just be discerning. That's the only advice I have for you there. Have fun, lose yourself in the romance, but be discerning as well. Okay, so let's go forward to Libra rising. So if you are a Libra rising, Jupiter falls in your sixth. Now, a lot like the 12th, usually I might stress out a little bit for people if they have sixth or 12th house transits. But for me, when you have Jupiter in the sixth house, I think of the noble mission. The sixth house is called the joy of Mars and the place of misfortune, but it's also associated with perseverance, hard work, determination, blood, sweat, and tears, selfless service and sacrifice, martyrs, warriors, etc. So when you think about Jupiter in a feminine, double-bodied sign like this, Venus's exaltation and so forth, I think of fighting for something that you deeply believe in with compassion, care, an emotional mission or crusade that might become really strong. The potential for healing things that have been broken or damaged, or faith that's been challenged, and now the sense of faith being restored or returning can come about. I remember, when Jupiter was in Libra some years back, that's where it lands in my sixth house. So it was also a Jupiter return year. But that was a year for me where there was a feeling of hard work starting to pay off, renewed inspiration in what I was doing, and a sense that no matter what happened, everything was going to be okay. That there was a sense of good luck sort of there to help me deal with anything that came up that was frustrating that year. I feel like that's Jupiter in the sixth, the place of misfortune with the great benefic there. It's like, okay, there might be hard work, but you're going to be really motivated to do it. There might be hard work, but you don't mind the sacrifice. It's filling your heart. You know what I mean? So I think that's it's a very supportive place it's a good place for Jupiter to be, considering the usual difficulties of the sixth house. All right, well, if we go to Scorpio rising, then we're taking Jupiter and we're putting Jupiter into the fifth house. And this is a place that was called the joy of Venus in the house of good fortune. Jupiter in this house definitely likes to bring babies. It's a place of pregnancy, procreation, creativity, joy, good fortune. It's a place that's sensual, romantic, creative. this is a place that also is naturally trying to help us get a little bit more closely connected to what brings us happiness. Like every day we do a lot of things, and a lot of the things that we do, we think we ought to do, or we don't really have to do them. And we think that they're giving us joy. They don't really give us joy. So Jupiter in the fifth, one of the great things that Jupiter in the fifth can do is just get you back to the feeling of, it's okay to be happy. I need a little bit more time for the things that make me really happy. Am I creatively fulfilled? If not, I need a little bit more time for the things that creatively fulfill me. And the things that you're birthing creatively or literally and physically are going to be a source of joy and inspiration and hope and so forth. You can go a little bit overboard with Jupiter in the fifth, spending too much, gambling, drinking, sort of the Jupiter can be a little like, what do I want to say? Can get a little zealous with like, like drinking too much or eating too much or spending too much or anything that's like a little too indulgent. Jupiter could expand upon and make like too big, too much. But otherwise, I like this as a year that's generally about the need for joy. So really, I think that's a really great one. All right, let's go forward. If you're Scorpio rising, that was you. This is now for Sagittarians. So Sagittarians, got the big eclipse coming up in your first house, but this Jupiter enters into your fourth house. So the fourth house is the place of home, family, property, land, parents, ancestral karma. It's your roots. It's the foundation of your nativity and your chart. I'm always shocked by this, but sometimes when Jupiter enters the fourth house, you see the death of an older generation and the birth or rapid development, success, and growth of younger generations within large families. It's a weird thing, but Jupiter brings like this weird generational turnover when it enters the fourth house, which doesn't, it seems like, oh, Jupiter in the fourth house, you buy a big home, or, you renovate, you build a garage or add an addition, or you do something big and spectacular. You host a lot of people in your home throughout the year, or, like just kind of simple stuff. But actually, there's often this whole theme when Jupiter enters the fourth of the turnover of, because look, in Greek mythology, remember the role that Jupiter plays. Jupiter usurps Saturn, the old order, and Jupiter becomes the new cosmocrat, whereas Saturn was the ruler of the golden age. And then, along comes Zeus and overtakes Kronos. And, so when Jupiter hits the fourth house, a place that the Roman poet Manilius associated with Saturn, when Jupiter enters the fourth house, a new order is established. There's like a sense of the new dynasty that's coming in. That can mean new families, new marriages in the family. It doesn't have to be your own marriage. It can be around you, new births in the family, and then sometimes deaths as well. It's an interesting thing that Jupiter seems to bring in the fourth house. But also just an emphasis on redeeming things and positive things happening around home and family in general. So let's move along to Capricorn rising. If you're a Capricorn rising, this is in your third house. Let me just, okay, there we go. So the third house was called the joy of the moon, and the house is also called goddess. And broadly speaking, it refers to all of the daily habits and routines, customs and patterns that somehow prop up and support the home or the neighborhood or the local village. So if you think about, for example, in my home, attached to our kitchen, dining room, living room, open space, we have an altar room. And every day, every morning, we offer our food to the deities on the altar from the Krishna Bhakti tradition. And we offer incense and candles. And that's very much like the goddess wing of the house, where the health of the home is dependent upon, and the health of the home and your sort of home base, wherever that might be, is dependent upon the little rituals and activities that you do around the home that keep the hearth fire going. And this is why it's the house of the goddess. But it's more complex than that. It doesn't just have to be your literal home. It doesn't just mean your literal home. The third house can also pertain to all the things that you do to keep yourself in right mind and right body, all of the things that you do that color or shift the atmosphere or environment mentally, emotionally in the daily world around you. And so a colleague of mine, Cassandra Tyndall, was saying that she calls it a house of meaningful rituals. And I just thought that is perfect for the third house. So if you have Jupiter in this house, to me, it's a year where you can, if you're a Capricorn rising, this is a year to kind of water the environment and see new things grow in it. Changes of mind, changes of perception, change in the way you communicate, change of the internal dialogue that you have. Maybe some change in the environment around which you live that can make it more conducive to joy and happiness and cohesion. It can also be a sign of good things to come around siblings, around friends that have something in common with your roots or childhood, stuff like that. So those are just a few. I also like Jupiter in the third house for any kind of media or writing project, anything involving tech, media, writing, teaching things, teaching skills, development or skill acquisition in general. Now, if you are an Aquarius rising, then we're putting this Jupiter into your second house. Now, again, one of the more subjectively positive meanings of this house placement for Jupiter is gains financially. This is the financial house. So you see acquisitions, big purchases, important investments, promotions, windfalls, starting a new business. It's a very fertile place for Jupiter in Pisces. Remember, so growth economically sort of looks like it's in the air for those who are Aquarians rising. On the other hand, this was a place that was about income and expenditures, the things that we put out and the things that come back to us. You put out work, you get a result like a paycheck. You put out money and you get a result like a credit card bill too, so the idea that there could be big purchases or big expenses can come along with this, though usually with Jupiter you're going to see that the big expense is something that you desired. Okay, we're taking a vacation that's a little bit expensive, or we have to buy a new car. Really excited to buy a new car, but it's a big expense. Whatever. Maybe you're buying a new home, something like that. Okay. I would also say that Jupiter with Neptune in this house can suggest some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, but I would be careful about expectations, just because Jupiter and Neptune can inflate and romanticize things a little bit. And while that's good, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and does not mean that anything bad is going to happen. It's possible that someone could, for example, spend more than they have on a promising investment and end up in debt. And it's not exactly what you hoped it would be. It's not nothing, but it's not all you hoped it would be. Those are the kinds of things I'd be a little bit careful of if I was an Aquarius rising in this upcoming period. All right, finally, let's put Pisces onto the ascendant, and let's talk about the last sign here. So if Jupiter's in your first house, this is like one of my favorite transits, because when it comes into your first house, you're talking about the only house that is fundamentally connected to your spirit, soul, psychology, body, appearance. This is your house. Every other house has something to do with you or the world or environment around you, but this is your house. Jupiter coming into that house boosts your confidence. It can boost your self-esteem. It can give you accomplishments. It can give you promotion. It can help you start new things. It can make you feel like you've leveled up in some way or area of life. So it's really wind beneath your wings territory with Jupiter and Pisces in your first house. Also, the confidence needed to start a new chapter in life. That's the thing I see the most over and over. Jupiter enters the first house. The person's like, I'm going to do it. Whatever this new endeavor may be, I'm going to do it. Jupiter in the first house is inceptional. In other words, it's a starter. Jupiter in the first house, by the way, for women, because it is configured by a trine to the fifth by whole sign, and Jupiter is also the exaltation ruler of the fifth, often results in pregnancy. It's another one that can mean there's a baby literally growing in my belly, so the gestation of life. On the other hand, if you eat too much, your belly will grow with Jupiter in the first house. So it's like also careful of overdoing things especially in regard to self-indulgence. It can also puff people up a little bit in the first house. Okay, so that sort of completes the journey through the 12 whole sign houses. I hope that that was helpful for you guys. What I want to do next is I'd like to take some sample charts. So here is how I'm going to do this. I'd like to take people, if you volunteer, that you have some sense of what was happening in July of 2010. Let's see. I'm going to look at MH, who was the very first person, and I think included something here for me. So July 12th, 1984. Okay, MH. So MH, just to clarify, are those stories from 2010? Could you write that into the chat box for me so I know? If those stories you shared are from 2010, that's super helpful. I'm looking for a comment before I go. Let's see if I can get a response from our sample chart here. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not seeing MH responding any longer, so I will just go ahead with the reading, even though, let me scroll up and see. So this person said basically that they, looks like they got a promotion. And let me see. Yeah, so they said that my girlfriend and I moved in together when she graduated nursing school. And she got her first nursing job. I got a promotion. Interesting. So let's just take a look at MH's chart. So this is MH's chart. Okay, thank you. I got the confirmation from you. Appreciate it. All right, so you can see MH's chart here on the screen, and we're talking about an entrance into the 8th house. So again, what do we think of with Jupiter in the 8th? You think of the wealth or prosperity of a spouse or partner, and good things coming, resources that come in through a spouse or partner or other people generally. What happened in 2010 for this individual? Their girlfriend got her first nursing job. So you're seeing the growth or elevation of a partner or spouse's assets, resources, money, which of course changes your own life. It has a direct bearing on your own because people are partnering together. And you also got a promotion. One of the nice things about in the case of your chart, one of the things that's nice about Jupiter in Pisces is that for you, it's going to be trine to the sun and Venus, Venus especially, who is your midheaven ruler. So any way in which other people's resources would come to benefit you or bestow something upon you, which sometimes will in fact result in promotions of different kinds. People say, hey, I value you. It was called the house of other people's esteem. So other people's, how they value you and what they give you, and it being increased or something like that. So yeah, and I would anticipate MH that you would, you know, that you would probably see more of the same, that you would see some similar pattern in the next year. So I would definitely be looking at that. The other thing that I will mention in your chart is that it's a big career year overall because you've got Uranus coming over your midheaven in 2022 and opposing Mars and Saturn in your 4th. I would think of some pretty significant changes happening in both the career and home and family house simultaneously, especially big changes around the career. Maybe that means the living environment's going to change somehow as well. And I don't know if you're still with the same person or not, but those are the kinds of things that I would watch for. So great. Thank you for sharing that. That was really, really nice example. All right, we're going to keep going. Stephanie Me says that you had your first kiss and real romance, and I also won a lot of art awards that year. So let's go ahead and put Stephanie in. Thanks, Stephanie. I'm going to put and you're a Scorpio rising. So I'm going to put this into the box, or I'm going to put this on the screen now so everyone can see it. So Stephanie was born with the Scorpio rising, which places the entrance of Jupiter in Pisces into the 5th house. So she says that back in 2010, I had my first kiss. Remember, the 5th house called the joy of Venus, and one of the places related to sexuality and romance. And with Pisces there, of course, Pisces is the exaltation of Venus as a sign. So Jupiter enters, you have your first kiss, and a place of creativity. You had art awards that happened in that 5th house. That's amazing. That's just exactly the kind of stuff that you would anticipate. Now, with Jupiter in this house, it squares your sun, ruler of your midheaven, right? So other people congratulating you or saying, hey, I want to give you something, that can be part of the good fortune that occurs due to the midheaven ruler being in the 8th and getting squared by a very benefic Jupiter. Jupiter enters and makes a sextile with Mars in the 7th, which can heat up sex and romance a little bit. Jupiter trines natal Jupiter on the ascendant, which can grant confidence and kind of like a boldness. And maybe you see that creatively a little bit. You can certainly bestow some good things through trining Venus in the 9th or squaring Jupiter in the 2nd. So you've got lots of very positive connections that Jupiter's going to make. Conjunction with Saturn that it will make in the year ahead is kind of interesting. I wonder about things happening with regard to your parents, your home, your father, your family, because Saturn rules the 4th house of the chart, or siblings as well. Maybe there's some big events around family members this year. That comes to my mind. But, if I'm looking at your chart just sort of overall, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that you're also coming into a long and slowly developing Neptune square to natal Mercury. That's really interesting because you have a strong Mercury, but it's in the 8th house. So it's going to need the support, or there's going to be other people that appear and somehow are a part of Mercury expressing its strength in your life. And when Neptune's hitting it from the 5th, I wonder about the kinds of blessings and benefits that other people will give you that somehow benefit your development as a creative person. But I also wonder about the kinds of things that you could get entangled with that other people give you, or that other people have that's of value, and the potential to compromise too much. I would be very careful about that in the next few years. Anyway, Stephanie, thank you for sharing that chart. I'm going to do 2 more. I really appreciate people that have good stories. So if you have one, let's see. Yeah, I just so you guys know, if people are putting the same thing a million times, I don't tend to call on you because I feel like it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like trying to shove your way to the front of a line. No offense to anyone, but let's see here. I'm going to just find one. Lissy Darko says that it was the beginning of your spiritual journey. That's a good one. That's a good one. Let's see what was going on. So Lissy was born February. Just double check it one more time. Okay, so let me go ahead and put this one up on the screen. She says it was the beginning of my spiritual journey. All right. Happy Saturn return right now, Lissy. You can see in Lissy's chart that she has Saturn returning in the 9th house. So a lot of 9th house focus for you lately. And I wonder about that with regard to spirituality, developing knowledge, studying things, developing practices, school, education, teaching, mentors, religious and spiritual, intellectual development, maybe some travel. But your Saturn return seems to be a pretty defining moment for you in that ninth house right now. So, I hope that that's going really well for you. And it's the most critical moments. A lot of them have already passed, but you're going to go through Saturn coming across that natal Saturn again, in the next couple of months here. In the meantime, one of the best expressions of Jupiter when it hits the sun, especially in a nice place, like here, it's right at the midheaven for Lissy, is going to be illumination. It's when people think about the sun, they usually think in modern astrology, there's all sorts of ways of thinking about it. But traditionally, people think of the sun, they often think about the father or authority figures or fame or people that have some high rank. But one of the things that the sun also referred to what was called the noetic light, which means the light of real higher knowledge. And Jupiter, as a planet associated with piety, faith, and wisdom, when it comes into a conjunction with the sun at the midheaven, can be like, oh, like this, like the clouds parting and the sun pouring through, and that feeling of moving into the light. And the light of the higher mind is one of the most brilliant, interesting, esoteric interpretations of Jupiter hitting the sun. So that idea of like a moment of illumination. And last time Jupiter came into your 10th, he said you started your spiritual journey. It is not uncommon to see Jupiter sun transits at the outset of people really developing an interest in spiritual or religious things. So at any rate, more of the same. You've got a Saturn return in the ninth house right now, a place of wisdom, a place of understanding, a place of learning, and developing serious commitments around the higher mind with Saturn returning in the ninth, defining your beliefs and commitments. But then also this idea of illumination and hope and inspiration and, like that. And it could also be all the 10th house stuff, growth in career, promotion, development, and opportunities for growth around career in general. So I really like this one for you. It looks pretty good. One thing I would watch out for, just to give a little bit of a red flag here, is Uranus opposing your moon. Could be some disruptions around work and job. I like that Jupiter is going to be bonifying the moon or adding something beneficial to it, it's your financial house ruler, right? You have a moon Pluto conjunction, which means you can go through some really big shifts around lunar symbolism, whether it's family, home, health, money. Uranus is going to oppose the moon this year in 2022, which can be a little shocking and disruptive to those topics, money, home, health, especially. So a little bit of disruptions there, but it's nice that Jupiter's also supporting the moon in the year ahead. All right, anyway, just a quick take for Lissy there. Thank you. I really appreciate it for your volunteering. Let's go forward to, I'm going to go back down and see if you, I'm going to go to the OK channel, the OK channel. That sounds good. So, and I'm apologizing that I'm not able to keep up with everyone's comments. I'm seeing a lot of them come through, but it's hard to, it's hard to keep up with all of it. Okay, so this is March 13th. Let's see, and we're doing, oops, I messed up. Okay. 1:50 a.m. in Fairfield, CA. All right, here we go. So we are now talking about the OK channel. I like that handle. Shooting for mediocrity. So, or you remember OK Soda? Does anyone remember that? Okay, so here is the fourth house. Now, the OK channel said, around this time, back in 2010, my parents were separating and we had to move out of my childhood home. Right. Isn't that interesting where there's like, that sounds almost more like a Saturn, like sounds more malefic. But I'm telling you, when Jupiter enters the fourth house, it's like there's this new order that comes in around family, and sometimes the overthrowing of the old order with deaths in the family or some kind of loss, followed by some turn that leads to the establishment of like a new family, a new home, a new living environment, new children, new marriages, whatever can follow. So that turnover at the roots with Jupiter is just, it's the only time where I really notice that Jupiter sometimes brings hard things, like more than you would expect. Like you'd sort of just expect Jupiter in the fourth to bring all this good stuff. But no, whenever it's entering the fourth, you see this. At any rate, I would anticipate that there could be some more turnover at the roots for you. Okay, channel. You have a period from late December through early May, where the idea of growth, turnover, development, opportunity, expansion around the roots, home and family, whether that's children doing things or moving houses or changes in your broader family with your parents. Those are the kinds of things that I would anticipate from Jupiter entering the fourth. Now, when I look at your chart overall, one of the things that stands out to me is that you're going through a Pluto square to natal Venus right now. So whatever's happening in the fourth house, the turnover and any difficulty that might be a part of it, I can't help but wonder about Venus. Is it something to do with sexuality? Is it something to do with an affair? Is it something to do with marriage? Is it something to do with money and the overlap of sexuality or romance or relationships? But something about Venus is getting triggered really hard in your chart in the year ahead. You already experienced it a bit in the last year, but another big reprise of Pluto squaring Venus at the same time that Neptune's hovering around your sun in the fourth and Jupiter's entering the fourth. So, the unfortunate interpretation would be like divorce and moving and, like really harder stuff around home and family this year, maybe with some silver linings that things turn out okay, or that they aren't as difficult as they maybe could have been. But maybe there is a little bit more of some challenges around this year ahead for you because of Pluto squaring Venus, because of Neptune on the sun in the fourth, stuff like that. But still, let's just set that aside. Oh, another possibility could actually be your children. If you have children, Pluto square Venus in the fifth can mean that, kids are going through some kind of change or transition in their life, or that something's happening in relation to children and marriage at the same time. Like if you're divorced, maybe custody is changing or a child's coming to live with you, or so you can sometimes see that, those areas will be active. The area of children will be activated in lots of different ways. Topic of your father and karma relative to fathers or parenting, roots and ancestral karma around fathers comes to my mind with Neptune on the sun this year for you as well. So a lot of stuff going on in your chart right now. I'd be really curious to hear how that all turns out. Thank you for sharing. So, I love that was it 19? Did I get the wrong year? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, here, let me go back. Did I pick that up wrong? Is that my fault? Sorry about that. Let me go 1997. Okay, well, chart probably looks quite different. Let me just see. 1997. Okay, channel. Everyone's screaming at me in the chat box and I just can't hear it. Okay, a little bit better. Yeah, okay, let me just I'll put it back on. Let's go back and I'll do it again for you. Sorry about that. Still, you get your exercise in chart reading, right? You just see how I read the chart. If that was someone's chart, you can see exactly how, my wheels would process on the spot, just, on the fly reading. And that can be helpful to study from. We do that in my classes sometimes. Especially my horary class, we'll just pull up a random chart, pretend like it's a horary with a specific question and read it as though it was. And you can, just exercise your interpretive skills. Okay, so, okay, channel, does it look like I have the right one now? Can you confirm? I've got Sag Rising with 1997. Tell me if it looks better. And there's a little bit of delay between me talking and it actually popping up. Okay. Well, the same. Okay, good. Now I've got it. So the same thing applies here, which is, or at least one of the same things applies, which is that Neptune is still on your sun, right? So with Neptune on the sun in your fourth, I would still go immediately to what's the karma around your father, around fathering or father archetype, the father energy in general, around your sense of life purpose as it pertains to home and family. And then the idea of turnover at the roots with Jupiter entering, ultimately bringing a new era, but sometimes having to sort of like usurp the old order. That all comes to my mind with Jupiter entering the fourth. Also, sometimes, you're just going to find a new place to live that you really love, or some place that really speaks to your heart, like captures or grabs your imagination and gives you. So a lot of times people say, what should I do? And it's like, sometimes it's less about what you should do and where you should live. But at any rate, so I like that for you. Neptune coming into contact with Mercury, that's a little fuzzier for me because you've got a fallen Mercury that's under the beams of the sun. It's a ruler of your seventh house of relationships. You've had some eclipses there recently. So I go like, okay, like Neptune on Mercury in the south. I'd be a little bit careful of dating someone with very poor boundaries, or having like really cloudy, vague, nebulous connection with someone, or even being deceived in a relationship. I'd be very careful about those themes for you in the year ahead, with Neptune coming over that natal Mercury, the next 2 years, really. And not to say you couldn't have a relationship, but just like I'd be very careful, because that fallen Mercury with Neptune, just prone to maybe not seeing things clearly. I also wonder a little bit about Uranus slowly approaching the moon in your chart. So potentially, more, this would be a little bit more in 2023. But in 2023, with Uranus coming over your moon and the moon ruling the 8th and being debilitated in the 6th, thank God it's exalted. But like that combination, to me, I go like, okay, like maybe there's a death in the family, maybe a grandma's getting ready to pass, or something like that, but probably not anything like, it's very rare that I would see something that's like totally tragic and out of the blue and unexpected. It'd probably be like someone like a grandma who's ready to pass or something, and they make their passage. Could also be about challenging health problems, or getting free from different kinds of emotional burdens or obligations, or cutting unhealthy ties within family karma. Maybe there's also, some way in which you free yourself from unhealthy dependencies that are affecting your health. I could see that in 2023 as well. So those are some of the things that come to my mind. It's interesting that this solar eclipse is also falling pretty close to Pluto in your first house on December 4th. So, I'd be careful about your health for the next month or two, as the eclipse is just coming through your first house. This is the last one that'll be in Sagittarius, but because it's in your first, and then the next series of eclipses come around moon territory in the 12th and 6th are being activated. You just had an eclipse not too far from your moon at the end of November, or at the end of, when was our lunar eclipse? It was earlier, a week or two ago. So, there's some like hints of maybe some health challenges, or like family karma stuff that might not be totally easy in the next year. Extending all the way to 2023 if we take Uranus conjoined with the moon. Okay, so those are some of the things that come to my mind. But Jupiter into Pisces in the fourth house, you do have an exalted Venus down there. So what I would anticipate is that there will be probably some gain or growth around the home, family, living environment overall. I'd be curious if anything positive came out of that time previously when your parents divorced, if there was anything that you noticed that was like subjectively really good or positive about that year, just to kind of get a sense of, what you were like, maybe what you were gaining from that transit. But at any rate, so that's what I've got for today. Thank you guys so much. I want to remind everybody, I'm going to put the link to my Kickstarter into are there people putting advertisements in? I'm sorry if there are. I don't know how this chat thing really even works, but here's the link to my Kickstarter. So if you guys are able to donate, let's see if we can get to 400 backers by over the weekend. We are just ahead of our pace last year at this time. So we're making good pace to break our backer total. 1,367 is our goal this year. Every $5, every $10, every time someone picks up one of my exclusive videos or a reading, it all helps. And also, if you can't pitch in financially, you can share, you can like the videos, you can subscribe to the channel, you can click on notifications, tell people about my work if you appreciate it. That's how I grow my livelihood and take care of my family and grow my business and stuff like that. So I really appreciate it. And don't forget, you can get any of my classes to take in 2022 or beyond for like half off through the Kickstarter. And that's the only time of year I do that. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we will see you again on Monday, where we'll start breaking down. We're going to do a preview of all of the astrology of December. We've gone through the big stuff. There's other mundane things that are happening, and we'll also do sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of December next week as well. All right, that's what I've got. Have a great afternoon, everyone.